Thank you very much. Thanks, Tomasa. So today I have Boris and Nicole here, and we're going to discuss DORA. And for all of you that have been here for the last day, DORA has been touched on by nearly every panel, especially when we talk about MiCA and the importance of not just MiCA and getting the legislation, but the hard work that comes after that, which is DORA, the Digital Operation Resilience Act, and the impact it's having on CASPs, blockchain companies, and not just exchanges, but all CASPs. So before we start, I'm going to start with Nicole. Ladies first, introduce yourself. Yeah. Tell us your experience to date, and then Boris, we'll move to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Tommaso, Robert. I'm super honored to be here, and I'm such a fan of the association, as you know. And very good to be with like the most expert on the topic. Peter, just learned from Peter there are actually both, right? Both are the most knowledgeable people in this space. So I'm so happy to be here. So I'm Nicole Dyskant. Everyone calls me Nikki. I'm advisor to Fireblocks for regulatory and public affairs. I'm also advisor to TaxBit and Mercado Bitcoin, a Brazilian and Portuguese CASP. And I'm also a founder and a CEO in RegDOR, which is a ragtag for regulatory monitoring and stakeholder engagement tracker. So yeah, and my perspective of talking about DORA come actually from before my entered into the crypto space in 2021. Back then, before like 25 years working in the TradFi world for compliance, regulation, securities, central banks regulations around the world, and that gives me a nice perspective of what DORA actually shifts. So, hoping to contribute in this capacity today. Thank you.
On my side, thank you as well. So I'm Boris Augustinov. I work at the European Commission in DG FISMA. We deal with regulation, legislation, and all issues related to financial services in the EU. We were just speaking before, so me and Peter, we are probably the veterans in DG FISMA that have been working for the last 10 years, I think, on all issues related to digital operation resilience, cybersecurity, fintechs, and so on. I started basically to work on this topic on the DORA and basically on digital operational resilience before it was DORA, when it was still at the level of an idea of a concept, putting all the seeds for what is today DORA. And then also, following all the international work, the level of the G7, Financial Stability Board, Basel Committee, CPMI OSCO, so a bit involved also, both at European level but also at international level. So yes, I'm working in the digital finance unit and mainly dealing on DORA-related issues at the European Commission.
Great, thanks. Thank you both. Boris, we're going to start with you just based on your, I suppose, inception experience with DORA. And when DORA was being drafted, what was the core problem policymakers were looking to address in Europe for financial entities? And what were the, I suppose, the signs and the signals of failures that you were seeing as regulators within these financial entities that called out, we need DORA, we need operation resilience, and we need to harmonise ICT frameworks within financial entities?
Yes, indeed. So I think this is probably the key question, right? Why we have DORA and what was the need to have DORA, right? So before DORA, we had, let's put it this way. After the financial crisis, at the level of the EU, we did quite a lot of legislation focusing on traditional risks, market risk, capital risk, liquidity, all this kind, but less on operational risk. And if you look at the financial services legislation at the EU level before DORA, you will see it quite fragmented. You will see that in some areas there were some requirements, like especially, for instance, in the field of financial market infrastructures, payments. But then there were other areas like asset managers, insurance, just to name a few, where basically some of them were like a black box. So they didn't really have requirements, or those requirements were very high level. And we actually did a mapping, and I don't have slides today, but I always make this reference to the impact assessment on DORA, and on page 66, we have a very nice colored table where we map the requirements, or some of the requirements, or the building blocks, if you want, that we have in DORA against the existing financial services legislation. And we colored that table in green and red, and it's quite reddish, basically, because there were basically no requirements. So then what we wanted to, well, of course, we saw the need to basically green up all that table, and basically to ensure that we have a minimum level of, cyber hygiene, a minimum bar across all the financial sector in terms of digital operational resilience. Of course, the financial sector, I mean, you already know, it's highly digitalized, highly interconnected. So that's why we have cut across the board across the entire financial sector. So DORA covers 20 different types of financial entities. So basically it covers everybody. Now in terms of the tools, of course, there are different tools to achieve this objective. Either you have a softer approach, going for guidance, or a bit of a, so I don't know how to put it, but a stronger approach, or more coherent approach in terms of legislation, and going that, of course, we opted for a regulation. It's directly applicable, no need for transposition. It assures that rules are applied the same across the EU. And we definitely saw the need to do something, and basically to have this in place. I should also say that, some of the market players, or some of the, financial institutions, even though they didn't have, some of these requirements in law, they were still doing, risk management and so on.
Yeah, and it's good that you touch on that, because again, and Nicole, I'm going to come to you on this, a lot of entities, a lot of financial entities, and I suppose we'll keep it to your experience now for dealing with exchanges and CASP through your role at Fireblocks. They have, existing behaviours at the moment, but what were those organisational behaviours and blind spots? What are those that you see when it comes to DORA, when you're engaging with your clients?
Right. Well, so first, I'm going to do the disclaimers that regulators usually do, which, I am actually representing Fireblocks, but this question with the blind spots, I cannot talk about, Fireblocks seeing blind spots in clients, but I can talk about my experience from both, TradFi, banks, and fintechs. How do they comply with regulations like this? And remember, we had this outsourcing material regulation for, at least 10, 15 years, for most BIS, umbrella countries. So it's actually not new to these entities. But I would say it's a new standard, because, most of these compliance programs for cybersec, business resilience, they are very good on the paper, if you say for banks and financial conglomerates. But when you actually, test each of these, say, time for recovery, say, they all say 24 hours, but when you're going to actually test it, it's different. They are normally doing this inside their own controls, and there are parameters where as opposed to DORA is now looking for the whole chain. So it's actually, a new level of granularity from liabilities between each of the participants. The board now needs to actually go closer. It's not only you approve a program, policies and procedures, you now have to, understand the allocation of actual budget and, how the things are actually going in reality. So I think we are seeing this, and also, of course, the actual crypto-related risks, right? Because, DORA is actually from before the MiCA came. So it's regulating the whole financial system. but it doesn't come with specific risk assessments and how to mitigate, for example, MPC custody, or say, how we're going to treat data sovereignty within the blockchain. So, specific topics about crypto, I think, each program we need to address in their own way. And my experience with the crypto-native CASPs, of course, they don't have this compliance DNA, but they do have the tech DNA, so they do have most of this, like what the regulation is trying to address and mitigate. For example, with MPC custody and use of blockchain technology, it's on their DNA to use their stuff to protect themselves, because it's then their core business not to, allow hackers or leaks and things like that. So they're normally more tech savvy, but then but they're not formalizing any of that stuff. And the tech normally, like the aim, the willingness to innovate with a good tech, normally it's stronger than the speed of security, right? And with DORA is a whole change of that. It's saying like, I don't care if you are willing to innovate, but here in Europe, security comes first. So, we're going to prevent innovation from startups. Well, startups to play in this fintech and to play with like other people's money comes with a price. Yes, you're going to have a level of maturity, and that comes with human technology and capital resources, right? So I see it that way. I see it as a kind of now we are looking more on this systemic risk. That's what actually concerns the regulator, because the next crash probably it's not going to come from the money flow and the, pricing crashes, but probably from a hacker or from an ICT type of risk management. So I think regulators realize that we have to regulate this as seriously as we regulate the money flow.
Yeah, and
Makes sense?
Yeah. It does. And one of the things you touched on there, really, I suppose I'm going to use the term mismatch, and that's what you're probably seeing in. And we won't just talk about CASPs and that, because all financial entities are, guilty of some form of mismatch in what their expectations are of a regulator and what they believe they're doing. And I suppose, Boris, I'll come back to yourself. From a regulatory perspective, what are kind of the obvious mismatches you would have noticed when you were designing the legislation, or more so engaging with stakeholders such as CASPs and such as, large financial entities? What were those type of mismatches that you felt they had?
Yeah, so basically I touched on this just in my previous intervention in reply. So when we drafted DORA and afterwards, of course, we saw that there was a bit of a mismatch between what the regulatory framework was saying and what some financial entities were doing. When it comes, for instance, to banks, this became a bit of a famous article we have in the CRD, Article 74, which was very generic, saying that basically you as a bank, you need to have in place the measures to address the risks to which you are exposed to. So this is a very generic, article, and in the law that says everything and nothing probably at the same time, that it's that the level where it stops, right? Where it stopped at least before DORA, right? But then in practice, we have seen that, for instance, banks, many of them, they had, very robust, ICT risk management framework. They were, implementing some industry standards. Some of them were doing, threat-led penetration testings. They had some internal red team tests. So they were quite, mature, to put it like this, in when it comes to cybersecurity, to digital operational resilience. But then we also had, other areas where you still had these general requirements, or only, requirements on capital for operational risk, and that's it, right? But then in practice, kind of nothing was happening, right? So there was this mismatch. Now with DORA, we, draw the line across the board, and basically everybody needs to, just lift up, or their preparedness, right? So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that when we draw this line, right, I think there are two aspects that I should stress. One was that we put emphasis on capabilities, right? So DORA is pretty much principle-based, right? It doesn't tell you how to do it. It tells you what you have to have in place, right? So it tells you, well, you need to be able to identify the risks. You need to be able to protect and to detect them, but not how. I mean, that's up to you how you do it, right? And you also need to be able to respond and recover, and then to incorporate the lessons that you learn into this ICT risk management cycle framework, right? So with DORA, we also shifted a bit. I think there was an important shift that we also saw then at everywhere, also at international level. There was a shift from the security approach to the resilience approach, right? Because when it comes to cyber, this everybody knows it, right? It's not a question of if it will happen. It's basically when you're going to have an incident, right? And when you have it, what are you going to do? So that is where DORA puts accent on the response and resilience and recovery. So when you have an incident, what are you going to do? And you need to have in place those measures to be able to recover, respond, ensure continuity of your services, and then later on incorporate all those lessons in this.
No, I think, well, that's like the best vision I think I've heard, but I think the devil actually lives in the details, right? It's actually when you go to implement and then you go to your national regulator and then you discuss like what's the level. Like you said, DORA is very principle-based and it's not touching on the crypto risks specifically. So that comes this, kind of a gray zone that regulated entities, vendors, and national regulators need to kind of work together to build this standard. And I think we are now exactly going to this growing pains together as an industry. First friction, of course, is between the vendor and its client, right? We've been negotiating with clients. For example, Fireblocks, it's now serving 100 entities in this DORA core pack, which is helping firms to comply with all these specific requirements. So it's actually more than CASPs that were already licensed, because we are also serving financial institutions. And during this process, what we've seen is that firms normally don't see, firms, the clients, the regulated entities, they don't see the real cost of the compliance, the real burden that it's on the vendor. So first on the vendor now, and then shifting to the regulated entities, and probably next year shifting to the final clients, right? Because it's a lot of cost, and I'm talking about not only the actual diligence and all the formality that is coming, but the audits and the pen tests, and there's new set of requirements that the industry is now getting used, and who is going to pay this bill is still a question, right? Regulators doesn't care about this, and of course, why would you, right? But at the end of the day, regulators also have a learning curve in how to implement those new standards to this new market that it's also new for them, right? So some of them have been, of course, more advanced before the MiCA, with the DASP's license internally. So today you see a lot of differences when you're talking with AMF or with, FCA or the Austrian regulator. With the Maltese regulators, it's still a lot of room for, guidance. So that's why I think the industry needs to come together to this and come okay, DORA comes until here, then there is the best practice we as an industry can achieve, and that will help regulators to kind of harmonize this, not only implementation, but their own rules. Because the beauty of MiCA is, like you said, we have a set of harmonized, that's the goal. But the reality is that we are still building this, And a good example of this, Boris, you know, is the letter that came in September from the Austrian, the Italian, and the France regulator, like claiming for more harmonized enforcement and supervision, and especially for cyber, a previous audit before the MiCA, the entities apply for that. And I think that's understandable, right? Because again, we're talking about this whole set of new standards and new risks that regulators don't really know specifically how to, you know, kind of what I'm going to ask to this participant. So it's a learning process for them. So it's helpful to have an external party kind of go into the process. Because, you know, normally when you go to a firm and you talk to someone about this control and it's specific for DORA, they will say, oh, I did this and that. So these people everyone now needs to change, like, how is my process? What's the process? What, you know, and that an audit is good for that because they go into the process, they don't care about specifics, and that kind of the same rationale that regulators come into firms. But on the other hand, again, this brings costs. And I think we need, also for the audits, think about it like PwC, EY knows, I'm not going to answer to that, but they don't know a lot also. So if you have, like, for example, specific guidance how on the custodian, technology, service provider need to achieve, and of course I'm here talking about Fireblocks had, we do have a very deep study and assessment about this, what would be a 5-star program for a custodian provider. So I think there's room for that. I'm not pitching that we should regulate the technology, but orientations, guidance, and more specifics, that comes handy, I think, now for the industry.
Just to say that, at least at the European Commission, we attach great importance to proportionality and to the costs. I can tell I had hard times dealing with these topics. They are extremely sensitive, and we are very sensitive to accommodate proportionality, and we are looking also at the costs that, you know, every, let's say, rules or regulation or whatever has the impact that it has on the industry. So, you know, and that's one thing. And then the second thing.
That's good to know, I think.
No, I can assure you, at least from my experience. And the second thing, I agree that convergence is very important. Yeah. Because, you know, different supervisors have different styles. Some are more conservatives, others are more liberals. Some understand better the technology, others not. And that it's where, you know, as you said, you know, the objective of DORA, it's one, but then when it comes to implementation and when it comes to dealing with the, you know, the authorities and the supervisors, it can differ from one country to another. And I think that is where, you know, one area where a little bit more of work would probably be beneficial.
No, I totally agree, if I can. And sure. I also think like, you know, harmonization is our biggest goal, not only within the EU, but think about it, these major hacks, probably the effects of like a major failure won't be inside the EU borders, right? So we need coordination with other authorities. We need clarity on like who is the actual, you know, mandate, this idea of centralizing within FISMA in an event like this occurs. I think it's easier for this, you know, European authority to coordinate with foreign authorities, but at least within the EU, I mean, if I have a neighbor that is like closer to the business and, you know, it's friendlier to the business mates, of course, I will go to this jurisdiction. So, I mean, it's, I think for me, that kills the essence, you know, the core, like the goal to the DORA. So I think we actually are kind of I would say missing this part. We could improve, let's say. And I also want to acknowledge that I've been talking to regulators about cyber for over 2 years or 3 years on Fireblocks had, and I've been seeing a lot of improvements in terms of how they're learning too. So I think everyone is learning together.
Yeah, I would agree. We're seeing a lot of natural progression with regulators, their understanding of DORA. We've been part of a couple of audits, and as the audits are getting stronger as they go along, as the regulators learn, but not all regulators are out there at the moment doing those audits. You know, they're mainly focused on CASPs, they're mainly focused on core areas where they see as high risk at the moment. But I think in time, like anything new, in time people will grow into it. But just as we finish up, I'm going to start with you, Nicole, and Boris, get you to finish us up on this. But if we were to look ahead at the next 5 years, Nicole, from you, what do you think regulators' view will be as the next kind of frontier of digital operation resilience? What's going to be beyond DORA? What's the next big requirement you would see? And I'll give that to you both.
Well, I love these questions because I can say anything. Like, I'm not going to be held accountable within 5 years, right? No, I honestly think, like, you know, all this blockchain AI tools will be definitely incorporated by the regulators for them to, you know, kind of share information real time and even like prevent or act immediately on hackers. I think that's the goal. How we're going to achieve that, it's still like, it's a process. But if you look to some regulators, right, I'm not going to name names, but I come from Latin America. They're still using Google as technology, right? So, I mean, there's a lot until we arrive, like all the regulators using blockchain analytics and using, you know, all the tools that the private sector are using. I think that's already a next step. And further, I would say preventing and kind of acting real time on financial hacks.
Boris, give us the exclusive. Next 5 years, what's coming next?
Nothing. No.
Much more conservative than me.
No, I mean, so we do not have any plans, let's put it this way, for a DORA 2.0. So we are not working on anything. But we do have scheduled for 2028 a review of DORA, so that's in the law. So we have a legal obligation to review it. I think that will be probably more focused. I mean, I don't want to anticipate anything, right? But I think it will be more focused on, you know, to see what things have worked well, what things didn't work well, what things we need to improve, what things need to be changed just to make it work better. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a review, right? So that's let's put it this way for the next year of next years. So the only thing that we have on our radar right now is the general review of 2028 of DORA. That's one thing. There is one additional area I think on which I think the focus should be put a little bit more focus, and that's third-party risk management. Yeah. I think that is one area on which supervisors should focus a little bit more their attention. I mean, we in DORA we put there the principles, we brought in the oversight, we set out, let's say, the framework. But now as this as DORA is being implemented, we start seeing different issues related to third-party risk and supply chain, right? And I think that is, one key area where probably focus should be a little bit more on the supervisor side.
Okay. On that note, I'd like to thank Nicole and Boris, and thank you very much for your time and your expertise on DORA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.